Welcome to OU on the Road, a virtual road trip. I'm Catherine Lehman, your moderator for this evening. Why do we call this series On the Road? The majority of our OU alumni, retired staff and faculty, and friends of OU reside in Southeast Michigan. However, we have a large contingent in Florida. Each year, the president goes on the road to our friends in Florida, bringing faculty presenters to enrich our guests' experiences. Due to COVID, we couldn't travel this year, and so created this series of virtual events, a virtual road trip. We hope you enjoy all the presentations offered this week. Now, Dr. Randall Engle will be our guest speaker tonight. Dr. Engle will be taking questions following his presentation. To ask a question, use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. You can type your questions at any time during the presentation, and they'll be answered following the presentation. I'd like to welcome a special guest, President Ora Hurst-Pescovitz, for joining us this evening. Thank you, Ora, for your interest and your support. Whenever we have a presentation with a guest speaker, there's a reminder that we give. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Oakland University. Oakland University fully supports the First Amendment. I'd like to introduce your host for the evening. Aaron Sidrovich is the Director of Alumni Relations and joined Oakland University in 2005. Beyond managing the alumni team and their initiatives, Aaron is highly active with the Michigan Relations Professionals Organization, and in December 2019 was selected to serve on the leadership cabinet for the Great Lakes region of the Council for the Advancement and Support of Education, or known as CASE. Aaron, you're here with me. You're all set?
I am.
Great, welcome. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I appreciate that. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our OU on the Road virtual road trip and tonight's session on what the monarchy has to do with Meadow Brook Hall. As Catherine mentioned, I'm Erin Sidrovich. I'm the Director of Alumni Engagement at OU, and I am so pleased to join you tonight as our session facilitator. I would, of course, like to first very much introduce our presenter, Dr. Randall Engle. Dr. Engle teaches in the Oakland University Department of Religious Studies and in the Honors College, where he was voted most inspirational professor. I'm sure you'll see some of that inspiration on display this evening. He holds a PhD from the University of Wales, as well as a Master of Theology from Luther Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota, and a Master of Divinity from Calvin Theological Seminary in Grand Rapids. He also holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in music from Calvin University. In addition to lecturing at OU, Dr. Engle is also an adjunct professor at Detroit Seminary and senior pastor at North Hills Christian Reformed Church in Troy. Finally, he is also a past trustee on the Calvin University Board of Trustees. So without further ado, I now present to you Dr. Engle.
And thank you for that very kind introduction. I also want to thank President Pescovitz and her staff for this very kind invitation to be with you on what we hope is the first of many Oakland on the Road events. As you already know, my name is Professor Randy Engle. I teach in the Religious Studies Department here at Oakland University and at the Honors College. I've done so for about the past 10 years. But tonight I'm here in Meadow Brook Hall, 88,000 square foot home, originally built on 1,400 acres of private secluded woods, about 25 miles northwest of Detroit. It's the second largest home in America, second only to the Vanderbilt estate, Biltmore Estate on the East Coast. So it'd be easy to assume, therefore, that because where Meadow Brook was built, isolated up here from the world, that it was just perhaps a lavish home, a haven for a busy, if not for a fantastically wealthy family. But you would be wrong. What I want to attempt tonight in this talk, what the monarchy has to do with Meadow Brook, is to try to convince you that Meadow Brook was very much in tune with society and very much connected to international politics and to the influences and trends of the time. Because I believe Meadow Brook is a direct manifestation in America of Edwardian England influences. That colorful king, King Edward VII, who reigned a mere 10 years, yet made such an impression that he has an entire era named after him. Meadow Brook Hall is an example of the reach of Edwardian England, even to America, to Northwest Detroit. Edwardian England shows us Meadow Brook's very existence, its very scale, its very use, and its very function. But we get ahead of ourselves. I actually want to start the story of the monarchy's influence on Meadow Brook upstairs, in all places on the foyer, right outside the sitting room on the second floor. With this curio cabinet, and with all people, Mad King George III, the last English king to rule the Americas. King George III, just roughly think about 100 years and some change before the Edwardian England era. Mad King George has an heir, his son, George IV. The crown will be passed to him. The rules of succession will be followed. The only problem is that Mad King George III's son, George IV, is a very unpopular king. He was a womanizer, a gambler. He battled obesity such that when his portrait was painted, it took him 2 hours to get corseted up into his outfit. And when he limped into the painter's studio, the painter quipped, "It's as though I'm to paint a stuffed sausage." The king famously quipped back, "No, you are to paint me as I wish to be seen, not as I am." It was that king who built the Brightmoor Pavilion. Think of it kind of as England's Las Vegas on the south coast. So unpopular was George III's son, George IV, that when he died, the London Times is reported to have printed, "Never has an individual regretted less by his fellow creatures than this deceased king, which eye has even wept for him." You see, if something was not done, George IV would leave the monarchy totally irrelevant. But not to despair, because George IV did have a legitimate heir, a daughter, Princess Charlotte. On her, the entire weight of the English crown would be placed. Princess Charlotte is married. The country is hopeful for a new reign of a new kind of monarch. The good news gets better because the princess, the future queen, expects her next child, her first child. And all the hope of England, you see, is on Princess Charlotte and her new baby, the next 2 generations to sit on the throne. The princess goes into labor on November 1817. Her husband, Prince Leopold of Belgium, attends her. After 20 hours of labor, the Privy Council is called to witness the royal birth, as was the custom. It was going to be the first royal birth in 21 years. But the Privy Council would have to wait another 30 hours while Princess Charlotte labored on. Strangely and ghoulishly, every minute was recorded by one of her midwives in a diary. And finally, the princess gives birth to a boy, a prince. but the baby is born stillborn. The attending physicians, in a frantic attempt to revive the stillborn child, rub it with salt and mustard, to no avail. 1 hour later, Princess Charlotte dies. And incidentally, 3 months after that, the physician will take his own life. England is shocked by the sudden loss, not of a would-be queen, but of a would-be queen and the next king on the throne. Prince Leopold goes back to Belgium, and the nation mourns as though England had never mourned before. They print commemorative coins, books, banners, images, and the reason why I brought you up here to the foyer, even commemorative china sets are made of Princess Charlotte, such as the one that we see here in the top shelf of this curio cabinet in Meadow Brook Hall. Here we see in this china the commemorative image of the princess, and in some of it, Prince Leopold is also painted. Doubling the country's grief then, you see, to move away from Princess Charlotte, is that we're back to King George IV, the total unpopular king. He had no other heirs, so according to the rules of succession, we then move to King George IV's next eldest brother, which would be William IV. He is living and he's married. The problem is he has no legitimate children, and that's the operative word. And he and his wife are too old to have any more children. So then the rules of succession moved to Mad King George's III's next eldest son, who would be Edward, the Duke of Kent. Fortunately, Edward does have a legitimate heir, a girl, Princess Alexandria Victoria. William would die. Ed would die before his brother, so he's never crowned king, and so the crown passes on to the niece of George IV, Queen Victoria, the granddaughter of Mad King George III. All the future of England will rest on this young princess who would be queen. So Victoria's mother, the Duchess of Kent, becomes what I call perhaps the first helicopter parent of history. The Duchess of Kent protects her only child with everything she's got, England's only heir at all costs. The glory of England will depend on it. Victoria's young life is lived literally in isolation in Kensington Palace. She's allowed the company of her dogs and her 40-year-old governess. The princess cannot even go down or up Kensington's staircase without the hand of her governess. In 1837, the crown does pass on to young Victoria. She becomes the queen, and she will reign for 63 years, a record of any British monarch's reign until modern times. But we'll pick up the rest of that story as we move on now to the living room of Meadow Brook Hall. I began my thesis that Meadow Brook has everything to do with the monarchy by taking you upstairs and beginning with a set of teacups that commemorate the death of Princess Charlotte and her stillborn son. I told you that that would set off a chain reaction that led the throne being offered to Princess Victoria, the famous Queen Victoria, who would reign for 63 years. I told you that that was unprecedented until modern times. Of course, as you all know, 6 years ago, our current queen, Queen Elizabeth II, broke that record in 2015. And if the queen soldiers on, that all indication looks like she intends to do, we will witness the first ever Platinum Jubilee celebration of a monarch in June 2022. 70 years on the throne. Imagine that Her Majesty has met every living president since Roosevelt. every prime minister since Sir Winston Churchill. And here's another fun fact about the current monarchy. We know the order of succession, that it'll go from Elizabeth II to Charles III to William V to George VIII. That means that none of us will ever live to see another English queen. The next 3 monarchs will be kings. Anyway, but before we get back to Victoria, I did want to stop here at Meadow Brook in the living room to look at these 2 chairs. These are the 2 club chairs that were in the office of John and Horace Dodge, the Dodge brothers. The brothers produced auto parts for Henry Ford before they launched their own company, the Dodge Motor Company. Tragically, both brothers died about 100 years ago in that world pandemic, when influenza took so many lives in America and across the world. And so it was John Dodge's widow, Matilda, who built Meadow Brook with her second husband, Alfred Wilson. Okay, but now back to Victoria, because we need to understand Edwardian England, and you cannot understand King Edward if you do not first understand his mother, Victoria. So Victoria is now queen. The year, like I said, is about 1837. She naturally must produce an heir. Usually an heir in a spare is what is required. She's introduced to her first cousin, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. The first meeting doesn't go well. It was her birthday party. The prince from Germany brings as a gift a parrot. Princess Victoria is much more interested in the parrot than she is in her cousin, Albert. A second meeting is arranged under duress, and it turns out to be a good thing because in that second meeting, the frog had turned into a prince. Victoria falls madly in love with the German, and they plan a lavish wedding, the first of what I think will start the phenomenon we call the royal wedding. Victoria will break tradition and be the first bride to wear white, a tradition that continues to this day. And when their guests entered the reception banqueting hall, they were all gasping at the centerpiece of a wedding cake, a 300-pound fruitcake adorned with taxidermy doves. And the couple will get busy producing heirs in spares. In fact, they will have 9 children in 17 years. And you heard that correctly, 9 kids in 17 years, and no multiples. And while having children was not a problem for Victoria and Albert, the problem was producing an heir that was fit to rule. The spotlight turns to their firstborn son, Albert Edward, that they dubbed Bertie. The young Prince of Wales is destined to become England's future king. Both Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, though, become quite suspicious because at a young age, the prince is acting out, and they feel that he's psychologically unfit due to his frequent temper tantrums, and that he's a stubborn little boy. Victoria and Albert actually turn to a new pseudoscience called phrenology to get to the root of their son's problem. The doctors measure, chart, graph, analyze, and study the size of the prince's skull. This was cutting-edge science, and in the end, when all the analysis is done, their worst suspicions are fulfilled. The young prince's skull is declared to be too small, and this is the cause for all of his acting out. The fear is magnified when the family remembers, as you will recall too, that Bertie's genealogy does not bode well. Remember, it was his great-grandfather who was the mad King George III. Could he have inherited some of these bad genes. So what to do? Queen Victoria to the rescue. Not unlike her childhood, the Queen now says that her prince will also live a very restrained, regimented, scheduled life. Birdie needs discipline and Birdie needs restraint. The problem was the prince chose not to be restrained or disciplined, such that the Prince of Wales will have serious dark times of rebellion against his parents, and it will come to full expression. They finally declare that what the prince needs is a boot camp. They send him off to the army in Ireland. Let the army make a man out of him. The problem is that that doesn't work either, for alone with the army, the 19-year-old prince meets a woman by the name of Nellie Clifton, an Irish actress. They begin to date, and news of this scandalous, outrageous behavior reaches all the way back to the palace. And now Bertie's father, Prince Albert, steps in. He is sent to retrieve the prodigal son. He braves the cold, wet winter weather of Ireland. He finds his son at the camp, and they return home together. But now Victoria's beloved husband, who went to get the son, her husband with whom she had borne 9 children, the husband whose bonds was so deep that the Queen even had a special desk made for 2 so they could work together, seeing each other's faces through the day. Her husband, her lover, her confidant, her political ally, Prince Albert, becomes ill. And in 1861, Prince Albert dies at a way too young age of 42. And incidentally, I always tell this to my students, kind of an easy way to hang this on history's peg is to remember that the death of Prince Albert kind of pretty much coincides the death of our President Lincoln. And whereas Mary Todd Lincoln was made a widow, almost at the same time across the ocean, Queen Victoria is made a widow. And Victoria is convinced that her husband's premature death, you see, was totally Bertie's fault. Had the prince behaved himself, the father wouldn't have had to go to Ireland. Had he not gone to Ireland, he would not have become sick and fall ill. The Queen will forever blame her son for her husband's death and lets him know. The Queen is thrown into a bereavement, the likes that nobody's ever seen. She will never wear any color save black ever again. She will never again put on a crown. She'll only wear her widow's bonnet. She places Albert's picture above the pillow on the bed next to her. She places Albert's Bible on his pillow. A place is set for Prince Albert every night for dinner. There's no picture that she will take without Albert's image or bust included in it. The Queen retreats into complete isolation, not even in London, but she goes to Balmoral. Months turn into years. Her subjects don't see her. There was one stretch of 6 years where the Queen made no public appearance. English subjects and her lords start to even question if a monarchy is even necessary, given that they have a queen that they never even see. From inside Balmoral, servants leak salty gossip. The curtains are to be drawn all day. No noise is to be made in the house, in the palace. When servants entered, they could not knock. They had to scratch to announce their presence in the room. But in 1901, Queen Victoria dies. She is buried alongside her beloved Albert in a special mausoleum she had built for him, Frogmore Mausoleum on the grounds of Windsor Castle. And there you have it. such a critical Victorian era that needs to be explained, you see, before we can even begin to understand the next heir, her son, King Edward. He is a product of the Victorian era. Restraint, regiment, very private monarchy, decorum, grief, black, quiet, everything cloaked, a veil of darkness. Will the new king embrace his past and carry all those traditions forward? Or will the new king completely shed the past, do a 180, and blaze a new trail forward, and do a complete reaction against the generation that preceded him? I think you know the answer. I just described for you many adjectives of the Victorian era. Words like restraint, heavy velvet curtains, cloaked, isolated, private, sober, decorum. And to understand the Edwardian era then, what you have to do is just think of all the polar opposites of all those adjectives. For without his aggrieved, old-fashioned, dowdy mother on the throne, Edward now will really go to town and bring to full height a new kind of monarchy that England had never seen. Remember, England now an empire on which the sun never set. He chooses the original name King Edward, even though, remember, he was christened Albert Edward. He famously said that history should have only one Albert, his father. So he's known as King Edward. Another interesting fact about this king is that just before his scheduled coronation, he had a bout of appendicitis. Now, back in his era, the doctors would recommend that the appendix be allowed to burst and that you dealt with the sepsis with antibiotics. King Edward said, "There's no way I'm missing my coronation. Doctors, I want you to go in and take out my appendix." Thus, the first appendectomy. And it worked. The king survived, and he made his coronation. Whereas his mother was seen a grand total of 6 times in Parliament in her 63 years, this King Edward will now show up at every ceremonial opening of Parliament in full state regalia, riding the state coach with the household cavalry. Later, he even added additional thrones so that all of his children and his queen could be seen with him at the opening of Parliament. The new king then turned his attention to his residences, to the palaces. He ripped off all of his mother's black, heavy velvet curtains. Light now illuminates the rooms and the hallways. He throws away literally tons of his mother's sentimental bric-a-brac. He adds electrical wiring, indoor plumbing, telephone systems. He converts old carriage houses into something called a garage that will house these new horseless carriages. In other words, every last vestige of the Victorian era, he literally wipes clean. He did initiate one project to honor his late mother, and that would be her memorial. To do the memorial, he first has to redesign the plaza in front of Buckingham Palace so that he could put his mother's Victorian monument there. So the mall is redesigned with a roundabout, and in the middle of the roundabout, looking straight down the mall for all the world to see, he puts an oversized statue of his mother. Remember the woman who loved to live in isolation and did not want to be seen? He literally now puts Mom on center stage. On top of it, a symbol of winged victory dipped in gold just to make sure that you can't miss it. Can we say passive aggressive? And the irony was not lost. And even before all the remodeling and the construction dust had settled, the king also reformed his household staff. with limitless resources, with unrestrained luxury, with a thirst for an ostentatious lifestyle, with conspicuous consumption, the king now hires staff such as the groom of the stool, the usher of the back staircase, the royal swan upper, gentlemen ushers, valets, groomsmen, keepers of the privy purse, royal keeper of the clocks, and a royal robier. And that's just the beginning of the list. And now for his government. In another counter-reactive move, totally unlike his mother, this king can't be seen enough. There's no plaque that he won't unveil, no ribbon he won't cut, no dinner party invitation that he will turn down, no cornerstone that he will not cement into place. That is, he perfects the modern art of royal appearances. He adds new honors and knighthoods and merits. Some critics start to say that was only a thinly veiled attempt so that the king could host more investitures and party at the palace and be seen even more. Back at home, the king enjoys formal dinners every night where all women of aristocratic rank were expected to appear wearing their tiaras. And for men, dinner each night was a white tie affair. In fact, some people complained that the king had gone overboard too much the other way, and some people actually complained getting an invitation to be with the king. For example, if you were invited by King Edward to join him at a country estate, not unlike Meadow Brook, for the weekend, it was a huge commitment, and for women especially, it required at least 16 different outfits for the weekend. Because now Edwardian England women were expected to breakfast in a silk gown, have a tea suit for morning tea. Afterward, lunch was usually outside in a tent, or as the English say, under canvas, where tweed and pheasant feathers were required. Then it was afternoon tea, and then it was the formal evening wear. All of those required its own set of accessories and jewelry. Nothing was ever repeated. Sadly, such an ostentatious lifestyle leads to the king's untimely death. He becomes a portly man, often out of breath. He smokes 10 cigars a day, and in between an equal amount of cigarettes. His preferred breakfast was steak, followed by full 3 square meals a day. The king dies of a heart attack after a brief but star-studded 9-year reign. So, we now understand Edwardian England. What in the world does that have to do with Meadow Brook? I think everything. I hope I've established the case for you that Edwardian England was a conscious or unconscious reaction against the Victorian era. And of course, that played out all across the palaces and country estates of England and on the entire island of Britannia, and in the houses of America, like here at Meadow Brook. It's usually said that America follows Europe by about a 20-year lag. And if this is the case, you see, then Meadow Brook was built precisely during the Edwardian England era. All of America now is waking up with England to the new possibilities of a bright new future with all kinds of technologies and new inventions that are fascinating and wondrous and helpful. One such person would be the man in this portrait, Alfred Wilson. Pictured here with a wolf because that's part of the Wilson family crest. It's why also we see the wolf on the stairwell newel when you enter Meadow Brook Hall. Mr. Wilson will marry the widow of John Dodge. They honeymoon to England, a world shaped there by Edwardian England. And one of their most informative stops is Hampton Court Palace, which made such an impression on them that they brought their architect there. And they said, we want our new home in Auburn Hills to be modeled after Hampton Court Palace of England. So if you come to England with me, and I hope you do, as a student or a tourist, what I always do is I will first bring my students or tourists here to Meadow Brook Hall. And I'll point out interesting features about the architecture, obviously Tudor, but also we look at the brick color, the use of the brick pattern. We look inside at the linen fold paneling. We look at the sundial above the main door. We look at the fact that every chimney has a different design. And I tell them, just remember that. Then we go across the pond to England. One of our first stops is Hampton Court Palace. I love it because I take them through the gates, they see Hampton Court Palace, and everybody's jaw drops. It's the same brick color, the same pattern, the same masonry, the same inspiration from different chimneys. Clearly an obvious tie from Edwardian England to Meadow Brook Hall. It's also no coincidence that we're here in the Christopher Wren dining room, a room of the house named after not an American architect, but an English one, the famous Sir Christopher Wren, the architect responsible for rebuilding so much of London after the Great Fire. And then, of course, opposite the window from Al is Matilda Rausch Dodge Wilson, an incredible woman, born of Canadian farmers, secretary, then wife, of John Dodge at the Dodge Motor Company. She will outlive 2 children and 2 husbands. She will be the first lieutenant governor of the state of Michigan, first female lieutenant governor of Michigan, I should say. And Meadow Brook Hall was her dream. And so was Oakland University. As so many monarchs had done in England, so Matilda also here wanted to found a university. And then she endowed it with generous resources so that the university could flourish in perpetuity. Though it was a lifestyle we can no longer imagine here in an 88,000 square foot home, it was, in the best sense, a very positive contribution that was to signal not, first of all, wealth, but culture. Let me use the words of Sir Winston Churchill.
The Edwardian era was a time of booming trade, of great prosperity and wealth, in which the pageant of London society took place year after year in a setting of traditional dignity and beauty. The great houses Devonshire, Dorchester, Grosvenor, Stafford, and Lansdowne House had not yet been converted into museums, hotels, and flats. And there we danced through the long summer nights until dawn. The great country houses still flourished in their glory, and on their lawns, in the green shade of trees, the art of human intercourse was exquisitely practiced by men and women not yet enslaved by household cares and chores, who still had time to read, to talk, to listen, and to think.
That statement about Edwardian England goes to the heart about what Meadow Brook is about. And it's a testimony here to the purpose of life here at Meadow Brook Hall. For this is a testimony to culture, to the life of the mind, to the university. Maybe that's why Matilda asked in this portrait to be portrayed without any jewelry. You'll notice she's not wearing any earrings, necklaces, or rings. When asked about this, it's reported that she said, "Because I don't want to be remembered for my money. I want to be remembered for my virtue." And with that vision and virtue, Meadow Brook Hall continues all the way to this day to inspire, to educate. Classes are held here, people learn things here, meetings convene here, weddings are celebrated here, memories are made, ideas are constructed. And in that way, Meadow Brook Hall, you see, was not a step back, it's a step forward. And perhaps this is why Mrs. Wilson asked also in this portrait to be shown walking forward. Notice her right foot. It's almost as though she's stepping out of the frame into the future. It is, in a word, Edwardian. And a picture is worth 1,000 words. It shows us everything we need to know how the monarchy, in fact, did influence Meadow Brook. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that all of you can find a time in your schedule to come and visit this beautiful home for yourself. You can see a lot of the things that I've talked about. And now, as I say goodbye from this platform, I'll be online to answer any questions you may have. And once again, I thank the university for this wonderful opportunity to be with you tonight on the road.
Well, good evening again, everyone. I'd like to welcome Dr. Engle to join us live now. There he is. Hello, Dr. Engle. Thank you so much. What a wonderful presentation. That was beautiful. It was so nice to see Meadow Brook Hall featured in such a way. Well done. And welcome tonight. It's so great to be able to talk to you. We have a lot of questions for you, so I'm excited to dive into those. But my goodness, gossip, scandal, outrage, rebellion. It's like, it's an episode of The Crown, right? You know, I mean, this is exciting. What a fun topic to be able to discuss, and how special to be able to connect that to Meadow Brook Hall. So thank you again. We have got a great first question here that is coming from Anthony. He says, hello, Dr. Engle. What inspired you to speak on this topic?
Yeah, thanks for a great question, Anthony. I guess the short answer is that in my teaching at the Honors College, I do a class every winter called Edwardian England. And I do it in the winter because the classroom is Meadow Brook Hall. And if we do it in the winter, then they're very kind and will light the fireplace for us in our classroom. So I do it for that. And so I have made those connections as I've been teaching that class every winter in Edwardian England for the Honors College.
Nothing like a nice warm fireplace to keep
Exactly.
the ambiance, right? Exactly. One of the questions that we got from Ibrahim is asking about Albert Edward and his encounter with Nellie Clifton in boot camp. He's wanting he's finding a little technicality. If she's an Irish actress, what was she doing in such a place? Can you talk about that a little?
I can, and I'll try to be very delicate, as I tried to do in the lecture. The fact is that it was his army buddies who were kind of taunting the prince and the would-be king, and they found out that he still had his virtue. And so it was his army buddies who said, hey, let's sort of introduce him to this wild woman, Nellie Clifton. And so they smuggled her into the camp, is how the story is told. Quite scandalous for the son of Queen Victoria.
Yes, that is. Like I said, there's so much scandal here. It was just fascinating to listen to.
Yes, and we haven't even gotten to the Windsors yet.
Oh, that's right. That's going to be next presentation, right? We'll have you back and we'll get all of that. Absolutely. What attracted you to study the monarchy? Speaking of that, what attracted you to study the monarchy initially?
Well, I think, again, I received my PhD from the University of Wales. And so there was a lot of time there spent in Europe, and a lot of time immersing myself in that culture. Though I must admit that even in my undergraduate days, I had a fascination with England, particularly with their music of the church. And I remember a friend of mine literally went in a backpack for 6 weeks around Europe. And I remember that back in that day, we bought a book called Europe on $10 a day.
Wow, $10.
We did it. And I would never let my kids do that today, but we did it. And the wonderful thing about England, and I'll say this too, for any of those that might be interested in maybe taking the tour that OU is going to offer, the wonderful thing about England is that you get a foreign travel experience, but no language barrier, right? The signage is in English, everybody speaks, the policemen speak English, the cabbies speak English, and they're all incredibly polite. That caricature of the polite Englishman is true. You can ask anybody on the street. So it feels very, very safe, very royal. It just makes it a wonderful country to visit that I never get tired of going to.
Absolutely. I have to tell you, I went there about 25 years ago and I had the most pleasant experience being in London and seeing everything, you know, that is was impacted by the monarchy, every little touch they have. And,
Yes.
you know, even the statues, the things that you were talking about in your presentation. But what I also thought was interesting is, as you were discussing Queen Victoria and the length of her reign and how that has now been surpassed by our current Queen Elizabeth II, right? What are some unique facts about Queen Elizabeth as to why she's been able to live for so long? And that question comes from Alana.
Yes, and her husband and her mother lived to be a centurion, or 101 or 102. Part of that is just the lifestyle they may maintain. I mean, when you have your own personal chef, she's visited by her physician every morning. So part of that answer, I gotta believe, is that she gets the finest medical care and attentiveness. But I also think it's in her genes.
You think? Yeah.
The Windsors just are really good stock. Like I said, if you look at her mother and so forth. So she's got the genetic lottery going for her too, I think.
Wow. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Absolutely. I also thought it was interesting when you had said, you know, between Prince Charles, Prince William, and his son, you know, I mean, we aren't going to see another English queen, and that actually, you know, was pretty profound to me when you said that. I can't even imagine how that's going to look moving forward. I mean, how many people have only known Queen Elizabeth, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And as I said, if I'm not mistaken, when she hits the 70-year mark, I think in my presentation, I said that is a record for England. But if I'm not mistaken, I think it's a record for any monarch.
Yeah, certainly.
You know, say what you want about the monarchy. Wherever you are on the spectrum, you have to respect just the service that this woman has done. It's just astonishing.
Absolutely.
And no signs of quitting.
Yeah, no, right? And not slowing down one little bit. Yes, absolutely. So let's switch gears a little bit here. We got a question from Ginger. She says, hello, Professor Engle. Are there influences of the Edwardian era on the manor's architecture itself, or perhaps other monarchic influences?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question, Ginger. And I think I hit most of them in the presentation, especially the outside of the house, very much inspired by the Tudor era, which the Edwardians liked, but also simply in the scale, right? The grandeur, the over the top. And at Meadow Brook, we also see a lot of English influences. The other day, I noticed for the first time ever, I don't know why I didn't, but even in the living room, they have the crest of the House of Windsor. I had never seen that before. And the Christopher Wren dining room and all that sort of stuff. There's very direct lines from English and from many of the monarchical houses to Meadow Brook today.
Wow. Now, I have to ask, you talked about the term under canvas you used about the tent, I believe, right? And Alana was asking this question too. What does under canvas mean? And also, is there a connection to the fact that Meadow Brook Hall has a tent up season in the back? Like, how does that work?
That's great. That's another parallel I've never seen. Yes, the English are always very polite. It's called under canvas. It means under a tent. So when one goes camping, you could say that you'll be sleeping under canvas. But also in Edwardian England, you see they would have luncheon on the chute. And so when they had a picnic luncheon, then they would assure everybody, don't worry about the weather, we'll be eating under canvas.
I like it. I think that's going to be a term that we're going to have to use for events out in the tent at Meadow Brook Hall. instead of calling it the tent, we're going to say we're going under canvas.
Under canvas,
right?
yeah.
I like that. We'll credit you with that one, Dr. Engle.
Yes.
So we've got a question here from Aisha. They're asking here, how long did it take to construct Meadow Brook Hall? Do you know?
That I don't have off the top of my head. What I do know is that coincidentally, it was done just about timed with the crash of the stock market in 1929.
Right. Yes, I do.
So it's right around that era. How long it actually took, I don't know.
Several, let's just say several years, I'm sure. Right?
Yeah.
Kate Thorson has a question here about how does Hampton Court relate to the Edwardian era, since it was the home of Henry VIII?
Yes. I would answer that quickly, that the Edwardians were interested then in their own palatial country homes. And in that interest took them to the already built palatial country homes. The one that can't be topped, in my opinion, is Hampton Court Palace. And so that becomes the inspiration, not just for Meadowbrook, but for many of the country estates built at that time.
Absolutely. And actually, we have Madeline Judd-Kowalski from Meadowbrook Hall, who actually,
hi, Madeline. Yep.
Yes, on the chat. And she said 3 years to construct Meadowbrook Hall. Groundbreaking was on Matilda's birthday in October of 1926, and the housewarming was November of 1929. So,
and Black Tuesday was in October, right?
Yeah.
I think, yeah. So, yep.
Thanks, Madeline. That was helpful. Absolutely. Jim Anderson, hi Jim, he's with us again tonight. He asks, well, he says, as a grass cutter at Meadowbrook and later a student at OU, I saw Matilda as extremely involved in details, and that's a sentiment you hear from a lot of our earlier grads who knew her in person. He asks, how much was she involved with the design and details of Meadowbrook Hall?
I think very much. I do know that they, when they took their honeymoon with Mr. Wilson, they took their architect with them and did sketches of Hampton Court Palace and other estate houses, and kind of said, this is what we like, this is what we don't like, let's use this, let's not incorporate this. And I also know that she was very involved in trying to repurpose many of the furnishings that she had already intended to use with her home that she was building with John Dodge before his untimely death. So I think she had a great interest in how Meadowbrook would look and a great interest in reusing some of the stuff she'd already purchased with Mr. Dodge. So that tells me she would had to have taken a great interest in it and a lot of pride.
Oh, certainly. That comes through. Ann Dieters Williams has asked a question here. Did anyone from the royal family ever visit Meadowbrook Hall? Are you?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. The Uncrowned King, so that would be Edward VIII, who fell for the twice divorced American actress Wallis Simpson. That's a whole nother lecture.
Right.
He visited Meadowbrook. And if I remember correctly, you always remember the strangest things. I think he stayed in Mr. Wilson's bedroom, and because there's a sign there that his people made sure that the Meadowbrook staff knew that the prince preferred to bathe and not spray. In other words, he would take a bath, but he wouldn't shower. And it's funny how I remember that. But yes, so the prince visited when he was a prince. He was the Uncrowned King, the year of 3 kings. So okay. Yes, yeah. Absolutely.
Wow. Yeah, that's a good little bit of history there. We're going home with some great nuggets from you tonight, Dr. Engle. Thank you. Can you discuss the hidden rooms in Meadowbrook and what was the purpose of these hidden rooms? That's coming from Leslie. Do you have any insight on those hidden rooms?
Yeah, well, there's a fun one. There's a circular staircase for Mr. Wilson that connected his study to his bedroom to what we call today the man cave. There's a fun little periodical reading room in the library. But maybe my most intriguing one is Danny Dodge's basketball court that is under the solarium, but unfortunately nobody can really go see it because how you have to get there is very serpentine and through a bunch of tunnels and stuff. But it's fun to know that Danny found a way there and would shoot hoops in the basement in a part. So and I'm sure there's many, many more rooms that I haven't even seen.
I love it. You got to get into the hall and take the tour and ask.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
where all the hidden passages are. Well, similarly, on those same lines, Aisha has asked, what is your favorite part of Meadow Brook? Do you have a favorite?
Oh,
Yeah, it's like
so
picking your favorite kid. No.
that's Sophia's choice. I can't do that. I just, every room has such a grandeur and such a story of its own. But the solarium, I guess, is just a beautiful room. One year we did have class in the solarium in the winter, and I swear every day by your watch, a deer would walk by.
Yeah.
And I finally said to Madeline, who's listening, I said, look, these have got to be mechanical deer that you guys set off every day at 12:15. And she swears they're not mechanical deer, but it's just a beautiful setting out there. Just
Oh,
beautiful.
it is absolutely gorgeous. Well, as it turns out, we are about to the end of our hour, and we have one last question here from Kathy. Why weren't the buildings on Oakland University's campus built with British influences like Meadow Brook Hall?
Yeah, Kathy, that's a really good question. And it's even more intriguing when you realize that later, Alfred and Matilda would build a second home on campus, Sunset Terrace.
Correct, right.
Which is same architect, but not at all the Edwardian or the Tudor influences. So I think then it was mid-century modern was kind of the thing. And I think universities had a certain look that they wanted to emulate, would be my guess. And it was far enough removed from Meadow Brook that maybe they wanted kind of a new, modern, contemporary feel to the campus.
Certainly. But boy, how lucky are we all to enjoy the gem that is Meadow Brook Hall and to have it be a part of our campus and such a big part of our history. And now to learn from you more about the history of the hall itself and how it was connected to the monarchy and Edwardian England. Just a fabulous presentation, Dr. Engle. Thank you so much. This was fantastic.
Well, I also hope it primed the pump for anybody who might be interested in coming as a tourist with OU.
Absolutely.
We are planning a tour, hopefully the fall of 2022, and it'll be called A Royal Life. And we have some exciting surprises that everybody will be able to take part in based on a lot of good connections we've been able to make over the years.
I love it. Sign me up. I'm going back. Let's do it. And I'm sure there are plenty of people on this session tonight who are feeling the same way after listening to your presentation. Again, thank you so much. I do want to say thank you to all of you who listened in this evening. We had a great crowd watching the presentation and listening to our question and answer session. If you can just stick around for a moment as our presentation concludes, there's a brief survey. We would love your feedback. Again, Dr. Engle, thank you. It was a pleasure to connect with you tonight, to hear about the history and learn from you. Really, thank you so much. And with that, I believe we are at the end of our presentation, and I wish all of you a wonderful night. When you have a chance, if you want to go to oakland.edu/alumni and check out the other sessions that we have in store for you for OU on the road this week, please do. And thank you again, Dr. Engle, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
Good night.